When I tell this story now, my voice already carries the tremble of age, and my hands carry the quiet ache of decades of work. But back then, I was a young mother in my late 20s, living in a tiny Midwestern town in Iowa, place where people waved from porches, where church bells marked the hours, and where everyone thought they knew everyone else's business. I had just given birth to my first child 3 weeks earlier, and I was still learning how to breathe again after the pain and fear and joy of bringing a life into the world. I believed those early weeks would be quiet, gentle, ordinary. I was wrong. Nothing about that month would ever be ordinary again. My mother-in-law, Linda, was the kind of woman who moved through a room like she owned the air inside it. Sharp-tongued, quick-footed, always dressed as if she expected the mayor to stop by for photographs. The morning she announced she would be going on a week-long vacation with her old high school friends, I thought she was joking. No one in my family, certainly not the family I married into, took vacations in the middle of January. And definitely not when a newborn had just arrived. I remember standing in the kitchen, still in my oversized pajama shirt, hair sticking every which way, my baby sleeping on my chest, when she rolled her suitcase past me as if she were catching a flight to Florida instead of leaving her exhausted daughter-in-law at home.
"Linda, are you serious?"
I asked, almost whispering, because even then I worried that raising my voice would sound ungrateful. She pressed her lipstick in the hallway mirror, snapped her suitcase shut, and said, "Honey, I booked this months ago. Besides, Walter will be here. He's more capable than I am. He raised 2 kids, didn't he?" Walter, my father-in-law, was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless spoken to. A retired army mechanic, tall, stoic, polite in a distant way. The kind of man who stirred his coffee without looking at it. The idea of him helping me bathe, feed, burp, and calm a newborn felt almost surreal. Not because he was unkind, wasn't, but because he always carried himself like someone who had built emotional walls too thick for anyone to climb. My husband, Mark, supported her decision without a second thought. "Dad's careful with everything," he said.
"You re in good hands.
Besides, Mom deserves a break." Deserves a break. I nearly laughed. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time since my delivery, and somehow the person who deserved to rest was the woman leaving me behind. But I didn't argue. I was technically living in their home until Mark and I saved enough to move out. I didn't feel I had the right. When Linda closed the door behind her, the house fell into an unnatural silence. My newborn son whimpered against my chest, and I felt a strange tightening in my ribs, a mix of nerves, fear, and loneliness.
I watched Walter shuffle into the living room, adjust the thermostat for my comfort without a word, and then disappear into the kitchen.
Minutes later, he called out to me, voice deep and steady, "I made oatmeal.
Come eat before it cools."
I nearly startled. Walter had never cooked for me before. When I stepped into the kitchen, the table was set with a warm bowl of oatmeal, a cup of hot tea, and orange slices arranged neatly on a plate as if he had studied how mothers cared for their daughters. He didn't look at me directly, he just gestured at the food. "You need strength," he said quietly.
"Sit. Eat. Hold the baby."
I froze. Walter had never asked to hold my son, not even once since he was born. But he stepped forward gently, almost timidly, and lifted the sleeping infant from my arms with hands softer and steadier than I expected. Something about the sight of this stern, unreadable man cradling my child stirred something deep in my chest. It was the first moment I realized he wasn't cold, just guarded. The next hours felt unreal. Walter washed the bottles without being asked. He folded the tiny laundry Mark and I had left in a basket. He reminded me to take my pain medication. When the baby cried, he walked the hallway with him, humming something so faint I could barely hear it, an old lullaby his own mother used to sing. As the days passed, I discovered he woke before dawn to boil water for my sitz bath. He washed and dried the newborn's blankets so carefully that every edge lined up perfectly. He cooked breakfast and lunch and insisted I rest whenever the baby slept. On the fourth day, I woke to the sound of a soft tapping on my bedroom door. "Breakfast is ready and the baby's bottle is warm," Walter said from outside, almost shyly. I sat up slowly, my body still sore, and something inside me softened toward him in a way I couldn't quite explain. I had expected awkwardness, maybe even distance. But instead, he cared for me as though he had been waiting years for the chance to take care of someone again. I began to trust him, not fully, not loudly, but in the quiet ways that mattered. But life has a strange way of shifting the ground beneath your feet just when you start believing you're safe. It was early afternoon when everything changed. Walter walked into the living room with a look on his face I had never seen before, his brows drawn, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the floor as if it had betrayed him. "I can't find Linda's red lockbox," he murmured. That lockbox, the one she guarded like a dragon guarding its hoard. Inside it was her life savings, a certificate of deposit, and all the gold jewelry she planned to pass down someday. I felt my stomach drop. "Are you sure?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes suddenly wet. "I checked everywhere." It was the first moment I had ever seen fear in that man's eyes. And it was only the beginning. Because what vanished in that locked bedroom would soon unravel secrets none of us were prepared for, secrets that would tear open the past, fracture the present, and change the shape of our family forever. That was the day I learned just how quickly a peaceful life could crack apart. I have lived a long life, long enough to understand that tragedy never knocks before stepping inside. It arrives like a thief, quiet at first, then unbearably loud. And the night that stranger appeared at our door, soaked from the storm, trembling in the porch light, that was the night the ground slipped from beneath our feet. It began with thunder rolling across the flat Iowa fields, so deep it made the windows vibrate. Mark had fallen asleep on the couch after a late shift, and I had just rocked my newborn back into a restless slumber. The world outside looked bruised and heavy, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Then came the pounding.
Not a polite knock.
Not a neighbor asking for help. But a desperate, frantic banging that rattled the metal screen door. Walter was the first to turn his head. His posture stiffened, straightened actually, like a man preparing for battle.
Old instincts, I suppose, never truly fade.
"I'll check it," he muttered. I followed close behind, my pulse thudding in my ears. When he pulled the door open, rain blew inward, damp and cold, and a woman stood on the threshold, mid-50s, hair plastered to her cheeks, hands shaking violently. Her coat clung to her body like soaked newspaper. But it was her eyes I remember most. Wild. Tormented. Eyes like someone who had walked a very long road of pain and finally collapsed at the destination.
The moment her gaze landed on Walter, something cracked inside her.
"You," she screamed, voice breaking. "You still breathe comfortably under this roof?"
Do you remember me, Walter? Do you remember anything you left behind?
Walter's face drained of color so fast I feared he might collapse. His hands, always steady, began to tremble. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. "Lydia," he whispered, but the name dissolved in the rain. So that was her name.
She stepped inside without waiting for permission, boots dripping onto the hardwood floor.
She glanced around as if trying to memorize every corner of our home before tearing it down with her words. "You disappeared," she said, her voice quieter now but sharper than any blade. "You left me with a child, your child, while you enlisted, while you rebuilt your life, while you married her." She jabbed a shaking finger toward the stairway where my mother-in-law kept her floral robe hanging, and never once looked back. My heart slammed in my chest. I looked at Walter, searching for denial, some gesture, some explanation, anything. But he stared at the floor, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid with shame. Mark woke up hearing the shouting and stumbled into the hallway. "Dad?
What's going on?"
Before Walter could speak, Lydia reached into her bag and pulled out several sheets of paper, crumpled, water-stained, but still legible.
Birth records. Hospital documents. A baby footprint inked in blue.
"This," she said, thrusting them toward Walter, "is your son.
The son you pretended never existed."
The room seemed to sink. My mother-in-law, who had heard the commotion, appeared at the top of the stairs. Her hand gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. "Walter," she whispered, her voice breaking on the second syllable. "Please tell me this woman is lying." But Walter said nothing. His silence screamed louder than any confession. Lydia exhaled shakily and continued, her voice softening not out of mercy, but exhaustion. "I raised him alone.
All these years.
And when the learning difficulties appeared, when the doctors said he might never live independently, when people whispered behind my back, I carried it alone.
I carried your burden and mine."
She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "I'm not here for money.
I am not here for revenge.
I just came because he asked who his father was. And I'm tired of lying." Thunder cracked again, shaking the entire house.
I felt my baby stir in my arms, sensing the tension that wrapped the air like a net.
The next morning, after Lydia had left with nothing but our silence behind her, a familiar blue sedan rolled into our driveway. Lydia stepped out, and from the passenger side emerged a young man, tall, gentle-faced, with a slight limp and eyes full of uncertainty. "This is Nathan," she said quietly. My throat tightened at the sight of him. He must have been 25, maybe 26. He looked at Walter with a mixture of longing and apology, as if he were the one interrupting our lives rather than exposing the truth. Walter stepped forward, hands trembling, emotions pulling his face in every direction.
Are you really?"
Nathan nodded once. "I've known for a long time. Mom never hid it. I just didn't want anything from you." He paused, voice cracking. "I just wanted to see you once while you're still alive."
I felt tears burn behind my eyes.
Then he reached into his backpack and placed a sealed envelope on the dining table. "I did this test months ago," he said softly. "A DNA test. I thought you deserved to know even if you didn't want to." Inside was the laboratory confirmation.
No room for doubt.
Walter covered his mouth with his hand and turned away, shoulders shaking with silent, heavy sobs. Mark stood stone still, as if someone had just stolen his name. My mother-in-law slid into a chair and stared ahead, empty and shattered, as though watching the walls of her marriage collapse around her. But Nathan wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said.
I am not the only one." The room froze.
My mom, she had another son.
My younger brother, Liam.
He's 20 now. He can't speak, and he grew up in a specialized care center. Mom tried to raise both of us, but life was cruel. "I'm not here to disrupt your family. I hoped you might help him. Not financially. Just visit him. Let him know he isn't alone in the world." He looked directly at me, not Walter. And I will never forget the softness in his voice when he whispered, "He's your kin too. He just never had a family." Walter covered his face and sobbed into his palms. It was a raw, broken sound, the kind a person makes only once in a lifetime, when the truth finally demands its price.
Nathan stepped back toward the door.
"I don't expect anything. I just needed this part of our story to stop hiding in the dark." And then he left.
Just like that.
Quietly.
A ghost returning to the rain.
I stood there holding my baby, my heart trembling from the weight of everything newly revealed. The house, once steady and familiar, now felt like it had cracked open, revealing hollow spaces we never knew existed. That was the night I realized secrets don't stay buried forever. They wait. They grow roots. And when they surface, they drag entire families with them. And ours was only beginning to fall. There are moments in a woman's life, rare, quiet, life-altering moments when she realizes her story is no longer only hers.
Mine changed forever the day Walter brought Liam home.
It happened 2 mornings after Nathan left our porch with rain still dripping from his jacket collar. None of us had slept since that night. Walter wandered the house like a man trapped between past and present, as if every step pulled a memory loose and tossed it at his feet. My mother-in-law barely spoke. She kept stirring her coffee until it turned cold, staring out the window like she was waiting for someone to answer a question she hadn't dared to ask aloud. As for me, I held my newborn against my chest and wondered what kind of world I had brought him into. Early that 3rd morning, Walter announced he needed to see something for himself. He didn't say where he was going. He packed a small bag, pressed a trembling hand against my shoulder, and left before sunrise. The air was so cold his breath clouded around him like smoke. Mark wanted to follow him, but I told him gently, some roads a man must walk alone. Walter returned late the next evening. I was rocking my baby in the living room when I heard a car door shut. I stepped outside, expecting to see only him, and instead saw a thin young man standing beside him, holding a worn stuffed bear to his chest.
My breath caught.
The boy was older than I had imagined, perhaps 20, maybe a little more, but his expression was childlike. His hair curled softly around his ears, and his shoes didn't match. He stood slightly behind Walter, leaning subtly toward him as though seeking permission to breathe. "This is Liam," Walter said quietly, voice cracking on the 2nd syllable. Liam lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes, dear God, his eyes were full of something so pure I felt my heart fold in on itself. He offered the smallest smile, a shy, crooked thing that lasted only a second but felt like sunlight peeking through a storm. He didn't speak. Not hello. Not his name. Not even a sound. He simply stepped forward and reached out very slowly, almost reverently, toward the baby in my arms. His finger trembled as he pointed from the infant to his own chest, then to Walter, then back to me, forming shapes in the air only he understood. And somehow I understood too. He was trying to say, "We belong. We are connected.
We are something like a family now."
Walter swallowed hard and whispered, He doesn't talk. But he understands more than people think." I invited them inside, though my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the baby. Liam walked in cautiously, as if each step might trigger an alarm. He looked around the house with wide, curious eyes, pausing at family photographs, touching the edge of the couch, tracing his finger down the wooden banister like someone exploring a foreign land. He eventually sat on the carpet and hugged his stuffed bear so tightly its ears bent forward. Walter lowered himself beside him, stiff with age but full of tenderness I had never seen from him before. "He hasn't been in a home, a real home, in years," Walter said. "The center cares for him, but he doesn't know what it feels like to belong." I nodded, fighting the urge to cry. Later that night, as the house settled into a heavy quiet, I found Liam sitting at the kitchen table alone, legs swinging back and forth like a child's. A single sheet of paper lay in front of him along with a dull pencil. He was gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. I approached slowly. He didn't look up. "What are you drawing?" I asked gently. He pressed the pencil to the paper and slowly dragged it across. The lines were shaky and uneven, but when he lifted the pencil, I saw he had drawn a circle with a smaller circle inside it. He pointed at the smaller circle, then at himself. Then he pointed at the bigger circle and gestured toward the ceiling, toward the house.
"You," I murmured, voice trembling, "drew yourself inside this home."
He nodded once, then clutched his stuffed bear and rested his cheek against the table, as though the weight of that single picture had exhausted him. Walter stood in the doorway watching us, his face streaked with dried tears. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes was one of quiet devastation mixed with fragile hope. Maybe this was his redemption. Maybe this was what he'd been searching for since the day he abandoned Lydia and her sons. Maybe this was his chance to be a father at last. The following morning, I found Liam awake before any of us, sitting cross-legged near the laundry room, helping me fold baby blankets. His folds were crooked and uneven, but he worked with such careful determination that I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "That's perfect, sweetheart." "Thank you." He beamed. Not with his mouth, but with his whole face, like nobody had ever praised him before. Throughout the day, he followed Walter quietly, mimicking the way Walter sat at the table, the way Walter tied his shoes, the way Walter tapped his fingertips when he was thinking. He studied him like a child studies constellations, trying to memorize every star so he wouldn't lose the shape of the sky. Mark returned home from work and found Liam playing with a rubber ball in the yard. Liam kicked it gently toward him and waited. When Mark kicked it back, Liam clapped his hands just once and smiled. It was small, simple, fragile. But it was also the beginning of something our family hadn't felt in a long time: connection. That night, during dinner, Liam sat beside Walter and ate spoonful by spoonful with the patience of someone who'd learned to live without wanting too much. My newborn cried halfway through the meal, and for a moment Liam froze, eyes wide, unsure. But then he stood, stepped toward me, and reached out his arms. He wanted to help. He wanted to soothe the baby. He wanted to belong. And surprisingly, unbelievably, my baby stopped crying when Liam touched his tiny hand. A hush fell over the room. Even Walter placed his fork down and stared as though witnessing a miracle he didn't believe he deserved. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found Walter sitting alone on the back steps, staring at the soybean fields stretching into the darkness. "I don't deserve any of this," he murmured. I sat beside him, pulling my shawl tighter around my shoulders. "Maybe not. But Liam deserves you. He deserves someone who won't walk away this time." Walter's eyes filled again, but this time he didn't hide the tears. He looked at me today like I was the entire world. "How do I make up for everything I failed to be?" "You start now," I whispered. "You love him fiercely. You show up every day. You give him the father he never had." Walter nodded slowly, wiping his cheeks with the back of his hand. For an old man who had lived through war, tragedy, and regret, this simple sentence broke him open in a way nothing else ever had. A moment later, the kitchen light flicked on behind us. Liam shuffled into the doorway wearing an oversized t-shirt of Walter's that reached his knees. He blinked at us sleepily, hugging his stuffed bear. He pointed toward Walter, then toward his own chest, then toward the stars. I understood instantly. He was asking if Walter would still be there in the morning. If he would stay. If family meant staying. Walter reached out a shaking hand. "Yes," he said softly. "I'm here." Liam shuffled forward and curled beside him on the step, resting his head on Walter's shoulder as naturally as breathing. And in that moment, under the quiet Iowa sky, with my newborn humming softly in the next room and the scent of wet earth rising around us, I realized something. This wasn't just a broken family learning to heal. It was a new family being born out of the ashes of an old one. And none of us, not Walter, not Liam, not Mark, not even Mew, would ever be the same again. If the arrival of Liam had cracked open the old wounds of our family, what happened next tore the entire floor out from under us. Healing is never a straight path. Sometimes it's a gentle walk, and sometimes it's a cliff you fall from before you ever learn how to climb. It was 3 weeks after Liam first came to stay with us. By then, he had settled into our home as though he'd always lived between our walls. He and my newborn me sweet little boy had formed a wordless connection that felt almost sacred. Liam would sit beside the crib, tracing circles on the edge of the wooden railing, humming in a soft monotone that soothed the baby better than any lullaby I knew. Walter had transformed too. The hard lines on his face had softened. His posture, once rigid, now bent slightly toward whatever direction Liam moved, as though his body had decided it would no longer risk losing another child. He cooked for him, read to him, sat with him through long silences. Watching them was like watching an old oak tree finally realize it still had roots worth protecting. So when the letter came, we were completely unprepared. It arrived in a plain envelope, stamped with the county seal. I found it tucked between a catalogue and a coupon flyer. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Bills and notices came every week. But when I tore open the top and began reading, my hands started to shake, and I swear I felt the blood drain from my face. Mark walked in at that very moment. He saw my expression, wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, and asked, "Honey? What's wrong?" I handed him the letter without speaking. He read silently. His eyebrows pulled together in confusion, then shock, then sharp, rising anger. "This can't be right," he whispered. But it was. "God help is het was." According to the letter, our house, the one where I had brought home my first child, where Liam was beginning to find safety, where our entire broken family had started to rebuild, was listed as collateral for a decades-old loan Walter had co-signed for his brother. The brother had passed away months earlier. And now the debt had fallen solely on Walter. If the balance wasn't paid in full within 30 days, the house would be legally seized by the bank. Our home. Our refuge. Our only stability in a world that had already shaken us enough. 30 days. When Walter entered the kitchen, Mark turned toward him with the letter crumpled in his fist. "Dad, why didn't you tell us?" Walter read the notice slowly. He didn't panic. He didn't curse. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he sank into a chair as though he had been waiting years for this moment to catch up with him. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," he murmured. "Your uncle was drowning back then. He begged me to help. I signed the forms thinking he'd turn his life around." His eyes drifted to the window, as if searching the horizon for a past he'd never stopped regretting. He never did. My mother-in-law walked into the room just in time to hear those last words. Her face froze, and for a moment she looked like a statue, beautiful but cracking down the middle. "Walter," she whispered, "this house is all we have." His shoulders sagged. "I know." That was the moment something inside me shifted. I looked at Liam sitting barefoot on the living room carpet, building a tower out of mismatched blocks, humming as though the world outside didn't exist. My newborn slept peacefully nearby, tiny chest rising and falling under a knitted blanket. I felt a fierce, almost primal need to protect them, both of them. This house wasn't just a structure, it was the only safe place they'd ever truly shared. "We'll figure this out," I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "All of us." From that moment, every day became part of a silent countdown. Mark picked up extra delivery shifts. He worked until his knuckles bled from the cold, until he fell asleep sitting upright on the couch with his work boots still on. I reopened the tiny baby boutique I had once dreamed of running. I sold handmade clothes, knitted hats, toys I crafted by hand during late nights when exhaustion pressed on my eyelids like sandbags. When customers didn't buy enough, I set up a folding table outside the church after Sunday service. Anything to keep a roof over our heads. My mother-in-law, who had always clung tightly to her savings, walked into the kitchen one afternoon and placed every last dollar on the table. "Take it," she said, voice shaking. "A home means nothing if the people inside it have nowhere to return to." Walter, despite his age and failing strength, listed the small plot of land behind our house, the one he had tended every summer, where tomatoes grew in neat rows and where Liam had just begun to learn how to plant seedlings. I watched him sign the sale papers with trembling fingers, and my heart cracked for him. That land had been part of him for decades. Giving it up was like giving away a piece of his own history. Even Liam tried to help. One evening, he shuffled toward me holding a wrinkled envelope. Inside were a few dollar bills he had saved from allowance money given by the care center, from small gifts he'd collected over the years. On the front, in shaky handwriting, he had written, "For home." I nearly collapsed under the weight of that gesture. He didn't fully understand the laws or the debt or the threat hanging over us, but he understood the fear in the house. He understood enough to offer the little he had. But even with all our efforts, we were still far from reaching the amount due. Every night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table running numbers until the ink smudged beneath my fingers. We were still short. Too short. 30 days became 20. 20 became 15. 15 became 10. I watched Walter grow quieter with each passing sunrise, as though he feared every new day would be the last one he spent in the home he'd built with his own hands. Then the unexpected happened. Mark came running into the house one evening, breathless, phone still clutched in his hand. "It's Nathan," he said. "He's coming." Before I could ask anything else, a blue sedan pulled into our driveway. Nathan stepped out slowly, carrying a worn backpack. His eyes were tired but determined. We invited him inside. Liam rushed to him instantly, clinging to his older brother like a small child. Nathan held him tightly, smoothing his hair, whispering something only Liam could understand. Then he turned to Walter. "I heard about the house," he said quietly. "Mom left me an insurance payout from her accident. I want you to use it." Walter shook his head immediately. "No. I don't deserve that." "It's not for you," Nathan replied gently. "It's for them." He nodded toward me, toward my baby, toward Liam. "For the first real family my brother has ever had." The air went still. Completely still. My mother-in-law, who had been silent for most of the conversation, approached Nathan and placed her hand over her heart. "You owe us nothing," she whispered. He smiled sadly. "Maybe not. But Liam deserves the chance to stay somewhere he is loved. If I can help give him that, then let me." I felt tears roll down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. Nathan's contribution combined with everything we had scraped together was enough. 3 days before the deadline, we paid the debt in full. The moment the receipt printed from the machine, Walter exhaled so deeply his entire chest shook. After decades of carrying shame, regret, and failure, he finally released some of it into the air around him. "We keep our home," Mark whispered, gripping my hand. "No," I corrected softly, watching Liam clap his hands beside us. "We keep our family." Even after the debt was paid, after the bank stamped its approval and released our home from danger, the echo of the past month didn't fade. Relief does strange things to a person. It can make you laugh, or shake, or collapse to your knees the way Walter did the moment he stepped off the bank's marble floor and into the sunlight. But for me, what settled afterward was not just relief, it was recognition. Recognition that a home isn't secured by money alone. It is secured by sacrifice, loyalty, and the willingness to break open your heart even when it hurts. And we had all done that, each in our own way. Yet the story of that time isn't complete unless I tell what happened after the payment was made, because in many ways, the hardest lessons came after the crisis, not during it. The day the bank cleared our account, Mark drove straight home and walked through the front door with the same expression he had worn the day our son was born, all mixed with exhaustion. My mother-in-law dropped a bowl when she heard the news and covered her mouth to muffle a cry that sounded too raw to be joy alone. As for Walter, he sat in his recliner, staring at his shaking hands, whispering over and over, "It's done. It's finally done." Liam stood near the doorway, clutching his stuffed bear. He didn't understand the financial side of things, but he understood emotion, so he understood them better than any of us. He walked to Walter, leaned his head gently against Walter's arm, and wrapped an arm around him.
Gesture so simpel, so pure, so instinktive.
Walter shuddered and placed a hand on the boy's back. "Thank you," Walter whispered into Liam's hair. "Thank you for letting me try." A few hours later, after the anxious fog had lifted, our neighbors began arriving at our front porch with casseroles, pies, congratulations, and gossip in equal measure.
Word travels fast in a small town.
But this time, the attention didn't feel intrusive. It felt grounding. As if the community itself had decided to wrap us up like a quilt, stitching our broken edges with their presence. My mother-in-law cooked a pot of chili large enough to feed the entire county. She wasn't a woman who expressed emotions easily, but that day she hugged Liam twice and smoothed his hair each time she passed him on her way to the stove. Liam sat at the table, cheeks flushed, confused but pleased by all the bustling energy around him. Later that evening, with the house finally quiet again, I stepped outside with my newborn bundled against my chest. The winter air was sharp and thin, and the stars flickered like old lanterns above the dark fields. I sat on the porch swing and thought about everything that had happened. The fear.
The sacrifice. The unexpected generosity.
The new branches that had taken root in our tangled family tree. I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit during the whirlwind of the last 30 days. We weren't the same people anymore. Not one of us. Mark came outside and stood beside me, hands in his pockets. He looked older, stronger, steadier, like a man who had learned the weight of responsibility and embraced it. "Do you regret staying here?" he asked suddenly.
I laughed softly.
"Staying? Mark, this house is the only place where I've ever seen so many broken things healed at once." He sat beside me, brushing the back of his fingers against our baby's cheek. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You held us together."
You held me together.
I felt my throat tighten. "We all held each other," I whispered. And it was true. But I didn't realize then how much more holding we'd still have to do. The next week, Nathan returned to visit, even though he insisted he didn't need recognition, didn't need praise, didn't want gratitude. When he stepped inside, Liam nearly tackled him in an embrace. Nathan laughed, lifting him slightly off the ground before setting him down. "What's he been up to?" Nathan asked. "A little bit of everything," I replied. "He's helped in the kitchen, learned new letters, folded laundry, and he's glued himself to Walter's side." Nathan looked toward Walter, who was pretending to read the newspaper but failing miserably. His eyes flicked up every few seconds just to check that Liam was still nearby. "He looks different," Nathan murmured. "Your husband's father, I mean." "Yes," I said quietly. "He is different." Nathan lowered his voice. "I didn't come here to get anything back. But I did want to make sure Liam is really okay." "He is," I said. "More than okay."
Nathan exhaled, shoulders loosening.
"Good. Mom would have loved this." I squeezed his arm gently. "She raised 2 good sons. You know that." His voice cracked. "Maybe she did. But she spent her whole life carrying weight she shouldn't have had to carry alone." "You're not alone anymore either," I said softly. He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. Later that night, after dinner, something happened that I will remember until the end of my days. Walter stood up from the table, walked into the living room, and slowly lowered himself to one knee in front of Liam. He held Liam's hands gently between his own. "I failed you," he said, voice trembling. I failed your mother.
I failed Nathan.
But I'm here now. If you'll let me, I'd like to be your father in whatever way you need. Liam stared at him for several seconds long, silent, searching. His eyes shimmered with something fragile. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Walter's chest. No words. No sounds. Just that quiet, powerful gesture. It was acceptance. Forgiveness. Maybe even love. Mark looked away to hide tears. My mother-in-law wiped her cheeks openly. And I, holding my baby, felt something inside me crack open in the most beautiful way. We were witnessing a man rewrite the story of his life, not by erasing the past, but by choosing courage in the present. And a young man, broken, abandoned, voiceless, opened his heart enough to let that rewriting begin. In the following days, we began the paperwork to make Liam a permanent part of our family. The forms were long, the interviews emotional, the process exhausting. But through it all, Liam blossomed. He learned new letters. He began stirring pancake batter with me in the mornings. He even tried saying a sound, just one sound, when my baby giggled. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even clear. But it was the first voice we'd ever heard from him. And we all froze, stared, waited, breathed lightly as if one wrong movement would scare the moment away. Walter dropped a spatula. My mother-in-law gasped. Mark whispered, he spoke. And I burst into tears. That single, trembling sound felt like a promise. A promise that despite all the suffering, all the betrayal, all the years lost, there was still hope left to uncover. But life, as always, had one more test waiting for us. A test none of us were prepared to face. And the moment it arrived, it threatened to take everything from us once again. When people tell stories about survival, they often talk about storms, their thunder, their violence, their destruction. But I have learned that the most dangerous storms are not the ones outside our windows. They are the ones that grow quietly inside our homes. Our storm arrived just when we believed the sky had finally cleared. The paperwork for Liam's guardianship was nearly complete. My mother-in-law was planning a small celebration for the end of winter. Walter, who had spent weeks walking on eggshells around every therapist and social worker assigned to our case, was smiling again, small smiles, rare smiles, but real ones. Liam had learned to write every letter of his name. He traced each one slowly, carefully, as if he wanted to make sure the world understood he belonged somewhere now.
Life felt steady.
Predictable.
Almost peaceful.
But peace, I've learned, is fragile. It began with a phone call.
A harsh, shrill ring broken into the soft quiet of early evening.
I was feeding the baby mashed carrots at the kitchen table. Liam sat beside me, coloring a crude picture of our house. Walter was outside checking the mailbox. My mother-in-law answered the phone. I heard her voice stop mid-greeting, followed by a deep silence that rolled across the room like cold fog. Her hand shook. Her eyes blinked fast. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Mom. Mark walked toward her cautiously. What is it? She didn't answer right away. She pressed the phone harder against her ear, as though the pressure might change the words she was hearing. Finally she whispered, "No, there must be a mistake." A mistake.
A word I had come to fear.
Mark gently took the phone from her hand and listened. His face paled. He stared at the floor for several long seconds before hanging up. My stomach tightened. He spoke slowly, each word falling like a stone into water. It's Uncle Raymond's lawyer.
Walter S. brother.
The one who had left us the debt. The one whose decisions had nearly cost us our home. What about him? I asked. Mark swallowed hard. There's another debt. One bigger than the first. And Dad's name is all over the paperwork. The room fell utterly still.
I heard my own heartbeat pounding in my ears.
Felt the air thicken. Saw the color drain from Walter's face as he stepped through the doorway, still holding the day's mail. He set the envelopes on the table very slowly. "How much?" he asked quietly. Mark hesitated. Then he said the number. It was enough to crush us. Enough to shatter everything we had rebuilt. Enough to put our home and our future at risk all over again. My mother-in-law grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. "Walter, how could your brother do this to us?" Walter didn't defend himself. Didn't soften the truth. He looked broken, like a man who had spent his entire life patching holes in a boat he didn't realize was sinking from the inside. "I knew he borrowed more, I just didn't know how much." Mark slammed his fist onto the table. "Why didn't you say something sooner?"
Walter's voice cracked.
"Because I hoped you'd never need to know." The house dissolved into chaos after that.
Fear crept into every corner.
Hope, which had been growing so steadily, began to tremble.
Liam sensed everything.
He watched our face, she always watched faces, and he shrank into himself. He stopped drawing. He stopped humming. He hovered near Walter constantly, gripping his stuffed bear like a lifeline. One evening, after overhearing too much, he walked up to me and placed his hand gently on my stomach where I held my baby, and then on his own chest. I knew what he meant. Are we losing home? Are we losing family?
Am I losing you?
It broke me.
Truly broke me.
I knelt and held his cheeks in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes.
"Now," I whispered. "No one is leaving you."
Not again. Not ever. For the next week, Mark and I lived in survival mode. We called lawyers. We checked county records. We begged for extensions. We sifted through Walter's old files, searching desperately for any loophole, any inconsistency, any argument that might release us from liability. Every night, Liam sat in the hallway outside the kitchen, hugging his knees, listening to our anxious voices spill through the door. Every night, Walter aged a year. And then, the unthinkable happened.
One cold, windy evening, Walter disappeared.
I found his coat missing from the rack. His boots were gone from the mat. A letter sat folded neatly on his pillow. My chest constricted as I opened it, hands trembling uncontrollably. The note was short. Too short.
"I won, drag you all through another storm. You've done enough. Liam deserves better than a man who ruined every life he touched.
Forgive me if you can."
Walter. My vision blurred.
My knees buckled. "Mark." I cried out. He came running, read the note, and instantly grabbed his keys. "He's going to the old river bridge," Mark said. "It's where he always goes when he feels ashamed." Fear punched through my ribs. No, wouldn't. But he would. And we knew it. We drove in silence, the headlights cutting through the empty backroads. The sky was pitch black except for the moon slicing between clouds like a blade. When we reached the river, I saw him.
Standing on the bridge.
Leaning against the railing.
Looking down at the dark, restless water.
Mark jumped from the truck, running toward him. "Dad!" he shouted. Walter didn't move. I climbed out slowly, my heart thundering so loudly I could barely hear the river. "Walter," I called, praying he could hear the steadiness I didn't feel.
"Don't do this."
He turned his head slightly. His eyes glistened in the moonlight. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I've ruined so many lives.
I can keep hurting you."
"You're not hurting us," I said, stepping closer.
You re-hurting yourself.
"And we need you."
Liam needs you.
His breath hitched. He shook his head. "I don't deserve him." Maybe not, I said gently, but he deserves you. Something shifted in his expression: pain, disbelief, desperate hope. Then, out of nowhere, there was a sound. A small whimper. A soft cry. A voice. I turned. Liam was there. He had slipped into the truck unnoticed and followed us. He stood barefoot at the entrance to the bridge, trembling, his stuffed bear hanging from one hand. He took a step forward. Then another. He looked at Walter with a face full of pure terror, not for himself, but for losing the only father he had ever known. And then Liam did something none of us expected. He spoke. Not clearly. Not loudly. But undeniably. Dad.
The word broke the night in half.
Walter collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Mark reached him first. I reached him second. Liam reached him last, placing his small hand on Walter's cheek and repeating the word in a trembling whisper. Dad. It was the first real word he had ever spoken in his life. And he chose it to save Walter. We brought Walter home that night. The house was warm, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon from a candle my mother-in-law kept burning, and for once, the silence felt safe. Walter hugged Liam like he would never let go again. Something had changed.
Something deep. Something irreversible.
The next morning, Walter called the lawyer. He faced everything. Every debt.
Every document.
Every shadow he had avoided for decades. And slowly, painfully, with community support and legal loopholes tied to his brother's mismanaged estate, the second debt was dissolved, not quickly, not easily, but fairly. We kept our home. We kept our family. And Walter kept his promise. Years later, when I retell this story as I am now, I still see that night clearly. The bridge.
The moon. The storm inside every one of us.
And I hear that small, trembling voice calling out from the darkness. Dad.
It wasn't just a boy saving a man.
It was a family saving itself. And it was the moment I finally understood. A home isn't built from wood or money or land. It's built from the people who choose to stand with you. In the light, in the dark, and in every storm in between.